This is Marie from Underground Crafter. In today's video, I'm going to show you the 3 basic skills you need for patchwork, which are pressing, cutting, and seaming. Thanks to Cricut, Oliso, and Sewing by Sarah for providing supplies for this video. Start with pressing because that's usually what you do first. I've preheated my mini iron over here, and I have a nice bundle of fat quarters, and because they were put together so decoratively, they have a lot of wrinkles in them. So I'm going to take out one here. We're going to press it. Now, when you are working with 100% cotton fabric, which most quilting fabric is, you can use an iron on the highest heat, which is great because it makes the ironing go a little bit faster. This particular iron has a safety feature, which is a silicone mat. And this is actually great because you can leave it right next to your sewing machine, and then you can use it as you need it. I'm using wool pressing mats. These particular ones are available in a puzzle type set, but you can also buy them to a particular size. Again, wool pressing mats are great because, as you can see, they're thick, so you can actually put them over your cutting mat and other sewing materials without worrying that they're going to get damaged. And you can also leave your iron sitting on it without worrying it's going to get damaged. And because they're relatively portable, you can keep them at your sewing table as well. Much easier than taking out a bulky ironing board. So we're going to start by pressing firmly in the areas, and you don't want to be swishing around a lot like this. You want to use some firm presses on the areas that seem to be the most wrinkled or have the greatest impressions. And you don't usually need to use any type of liquid, but if you have a steam iron, you can use steam because it doesn't damage cotton fabric. And because I use such a high heat, as you can see, these creases are coming out pretty easily. Now, if you had a very wrinkled fabric, let's say you pre-washed your fabric and, you know, in the dryer it got very wrinkled, you might need to definitely use that steam. But generally speaking, just a firm motion is really all you need to press your fabric. Now, when you press your fabric, you want to think about how you're going to cut it. And the reason for this is because in this case I have just a small fat quarter, but if I had a large yardage piece, and depending on the size of my cutting mat, I may want to actually press the fabric into a piece that is easier to cut. So think about that, because you can usually press your fabric into about 4 layers and still be easy to cut with a 45mm rotary cutter. But you'll want to press it as flat as you can before you start folding it, because, for example, you see this crease here. If I were to fold it and then press all the pieces folded together, it's very possible that I might still leave this crease. And creases don't seem like a big deal, but they can be in quilting, and that's because your seam allowances are very small. They're only a 1/4 inch. And with other types of sewing, we're usually working with a larger seam allowance, which means we have a little bit more room for error in cutting. And so if we cut something a little bit smaller because it's creased, with the seam allowance, our finished quilt blocks might not be the right size. And so that's why I would definitely encourage you to do a strong job of pressing before you get started cutting. As with any type of ironing, you don't want to leave the iron on any one place for more than a few seconds, because of course, just like any type of ironing, you can you can damage the fabric that way and leave an iron-shaped imprint, which you definitely don't want on your beautiful quilting fabric. Now, some people actually, speaking of beautiful quilting fabric, some people feel uncomfortable pressing on the right side of the fabric because they worry they'll damage, you know, if they make a mistake, it'll impact the print. So you can also press on the wrong side of the fabric. And truth be told, on the wrong side, because it's usually lighter than the right side of the fabric, it may be easier to see creases and wrinkles than it is on the right side. So after you've pressed out the main creases, as I said, you can set the fabric up to be cut. And as I mentioned, 4 layers of fabric is ideal for a 45mm rotary cutter. If you want to cut more layers at once, you'll definitely want a larger rotary cutter, probably 60mm. Okay, so I've gotten the bulk of the creases out. I'm going to leave my iron in its little case here and set it aside until I finish cutting and my first part of seaming. Most cutting for quilting is done with a rotary cutter, an acrylic ruler, and a mat. These come in all different sizes. Generally speaking, I recommend that you use a ruler and a mat from the same brand when possible, and that's because all of the in-between markers, like in between inches, so 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 1/8 inch, etc., will align much easier because they'll be using the same type of symbol. As I mentioned before, if you're cutting anywhere between 1 to 4 layers, a 45mm rotary cutter is ideal. Every rotary cutter has a slightly different design, but they all have a safety mechanism. So you want to just first check out the cutter to make sure you know how it works. For this particular rotary cutter, you pull this switch down, and I'm going to show it from the back while I pull the switch down. You can see the blade is extended, and then you press this button, which is a safety button, and that covers the blade again. As I mentioned, there's many different types of rotary cutters, but they all have a similar concept. With this one, you unlock the safety first, then you squeeze, and then you lock the safety in place, and that's how you get the blade extended. When you're finished, you just press that and the protector comes out. Next, you'll want to line your fabric up. And in this case, I have a fold at the top, but if I didn't have a fold, I could just as easily put a flat edge. And you want to line it up so that the first edge you're going to cut is just slightly above one of the lines on your cutting mat. And then to keep things straight, you're going to want to align your ruler to that very same line. So in this case, I've chosen this lighter blue line, and I'm going to make sure that I have my cutting ruler down firmly. Now, whatever is your dominant hand, in this case it's my right hand, that's the one that should be using the rotary cutter. Your non-dominant hand, in this case my left hand, should be holding the ruler down, and you want to apply a firm pressure, but you don't want any parts of your finger to extend over the ruler. And that's because rotary cutters are extremely sharp and very dangerous. So you want to keep all of your fingers inside of the ruler. You're going to cut away from you, and that's so obviously you don't cut yourself. So in this case, I'm starting down here at this lower edge. I'm going to place the rotary cutter blade so that it's directly aligned to the acrylic ruler. And once that's ready, I'm going to slowly but firmly move across the length of the ruler. Now in this case, I have a pretty long way to cut. So I'm going to hold down with both sides and move my hand just to make sure I haven't changed the ruler. There are actually tools you can use to hold the ruler in place if you have concerns about that. Then I'm going to keep cutting. And now I can slowly move that piece away. Going to put the safety on before I switch position on my ruler. Now for this particular project, I want to cut 5-inch squares. So now that I have one edge, I'm not going to move the fabric. And that's because I want the fabric to stay in position so I don't have to keep cutting that edge. And then I'm going to line my ruler up against this side. And I'm going to follow the same process. I'm going to cut through all layers working away from me, and then I'm going to move the fabric. Now because I wanted a 5-inch cut, I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'm going to place my ruler again so that it's lined up on the opposite end here. And I'm going to keep doing that all the way across. And one more time for this particular piece. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, then again, put the safety on that. This piece I don't need for this project. Most quilters have a scrap pile, so I'm going to put that in my scrap pile. And then I'm going to trim 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 across the bottom here using the same approach that I've used. It's a little easier now because it's not as wide. And I'm going to actually rotate my cutting mat so that I can be on this side. Okay, I don't want to be stretching across my body again, as I've mentioned before. So if you have enough space, you may be able to walk all the way around your cutting mat. For my particular cutting space, I don't have a lot of room, so I just shift the mat around when I'm ready to cut at a different angle. Okay, so what I did there, I had just a few cuts. I think it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 all together. And what I've ended up with here is 4 layers each, and so there's actually a total of 12 squares. So that's how you cut safely with a rotary cutter. Now let's talk about piecing. Okay, we're going to start by pinning our pieces of fabric together. You're going to put the right sides of the fabric together, and you're going to align them, the place that you're going to sew, to the right side. When you pin, I usually pin horizontally. Makes it a lot easier to pull out the pins as you sew. And depending on the size of your piece and the type of fabric you're using, you may only need 1 or 2 pins. We'll put 3 on this to make sure we get a good 1/4 inch seam. So now that the piece is pinned together, I'm going to head over to my sewing machine. At the sewing machine, you'll want to start with your needle in the up position. Then you're going to lift up your presser foot and place the fabric under it. Depending on, as I mentioned, you're most likely going to want a 1/4 inch seam. So you may have a walking foot, or you may have a marking like I do on my machine that indicates that you have a 1/4 inch seam. If you're new to sewing, you'll want to use a relatively slow speed, which you can often adjust the speed setting on your machine. As well, the amount of pressure you put onto the foot pedal will help you to determine the speed. So I'm going to go slowly to keep my project within this 1/4 inch guideline. And as I get to each pin, before the needle comes to the pin, I'm going to pull it out and put it into my pin cushion for safety reasons. And then I'm going to keep sewing. You can see that the fabric will feed itself through pretty automatically. And because cotton fabric is one of the easiest, or I should say quilting cotton is one of the easiest fabrics to work with, it's very easy to go through your machine. It's not a lot of pressure on your end. Really, you're just kind of guiding the fabric to make sure it doesn't make any twists or turns. Now, since this is a piece that is going to then be sewn to another piece and another piece and another piece, I don't have to reinforce the edges because those will be seamed over. However, if this was my finished quilt top and I was assembling all of the final blocks together, I would want to reinforce the stitches at the start and the end of the block. Some machines have a setting that allows you to do that, and if not, you would do 2 to 3 stitches forward and then 2 to 3 stitches in reverse at the start and the end. Once you're done, you're going to put your needle in the up position, which you may have a button that controls that, or you may use the dial on the right of your machine to do that. And then you're going to lift the presser foot lever, and then you're going to gently pull it out. Some machines have a seam cutter on the side of the machine. If that's the case, you can do that, or you can use your thread snips. Now that you have your piece with your 1/4 inch seam, the next step is to trim the fabric edges and to press this. So we're going to go back to our little ironing station and do some pressing. Okay, so at the end of each piece, or at the end of when you have several of the same type of piece assembled, you're going to want to press it. And what you're trying to do is you're going to work on the back and you're going to press the seams towards the darker color. That's going to make it easier to sew through these seams with the next piece that you make, and it's also going to make it less likely that fabric will show through. That's why we're pressing it towards the darker color. And this is why you can see it's a lot easier to have a small ironing station rather than to set up an ironing board, because depending on the number of pieces you're assembling, you may have to do quite a bit of pressing. And you're just going to press it, like I said, towards the dark seam, and then keep the iron down for a moment, and then that's pretty much it. It's a very simple pressing. Now, depending on what you're going to sew through next, you may want to trim this piece down, or if it's going to be part of a larger block, you may want to continue adding pieces to it before you trim it down. Once you get to the final quilt block, you're going to use your rotary cutter, your mat, and your acrylic ruler to trim all the blocks to the size that's required for your pattern. And you can see, for example, this piece is a little bit longer, so when I come to my final block, I'm going to cut these off. And the reason why we want to trim down the blocks is so we don't have a lot of extra seams adding bulk on the back of our quilted top. Thanks for watching this video, and I hope you now have the basics of patchwork, which are pressing, cutting, and sewing a 1/4 inch seam. Have a great day.